During a fight, my daughter-in-law screamed, "I hope you die." My son did nothing. They regretted it when I sold the house I gave them. This is my story of betrayal, survival, and the courage to rebuild from ashes. A tale of how I discovered my own strength at 73, when my son and daughter-in-law tried to erase me from existence. Subscribe and comment below where you're watching from. I remember the exact moment my world shattered. Standing on Eleanor's doorstep, clutching a small suitcase containing the remnants of my life, my face marked with dried tears. "My daughter-in-law wished me dead," I whispered, my voice breaking. And my son just sat there in silence. Eleanor's kind face crumpled with concern as she pulled me inside. I'd known her for all of 3 months, yet she was the only person I could turn to after what happened. 3 months earlier, I had been signing papers for a spacious house in Boston. The ink was barely dry when my brother David, always the cautious attorney, placed his hand over mine. "Keep the deed in your name only, Martha," he advised, his eyes serious behind his glasses. "Robert always had his suspicions about that girl. It's just a precaution." I'd felt guilty then, as if I wasn't fully trusting James and Vanessa, but I reluctantly agreed. When I handed the keys to my son James, his face lit up like Christmas morning. "It's a gift," I told him, my heart swelling with maternal pride. "All I ask is for a small room where I can spend my last years close to you." The words, "last years," haunted me now. At 73, I wasn't expecting many more, but I'd hoped they'd be peaceful, surrounded by family. The trouble started small. My personal items mysteriously reorganized. Dinner plans changed without anyone telling me. My blood pressure pills disappeared, only to reappear days later in different bottles. "Mom, Vanessa is just trying to help with your organization," James would say, distracted whenever I tried to broach the subject. Then came the separate, slower Wi-Fi network, specially for you, Martha, so you won't get confused with passwords. The patronizing smile on Vanessa's face made my stomach turn. One night, I couldn't sleep and wandered toward the kitchen for tea. Vanessa's voice drifted from the living room, where she was speaking on the phone. "It's like taking care of a child, only worse," she was saying, laughing softly. "But the house is worth every second of bearing this burden." I froze, my hand on the wall for support. The words struck me physically, like a slap across my weathered face. I wasn't family to her. I was an obstacle, a burden to be tolerated for material gain. I retreated to my room, careful not to make a sound. Sleep wouldn't come as her words echoed in my mind. All those years raising James alone after Robert's early death, working 2 jobs, sacrificing everything so he could have opportunities I never had, reduced to this, a burden, an inconvenience. That night, staring at the ceiling, I made myself a promise. I wouldn't remain a victim. Somehow, I would reclaim my dignity. I just didn't know yet how bad things would actually get, or how far they would push me before I finally broke. The isolation happened so gradually that I barely noticed it at first, like water slowly rising around your ankles before you realize you're drowning. After hearing Vanessa call me a burden, I began paying closer attention. The small indignities accumulated day by day. My morning newspaper disappearing before I could read it. Phone calls from my few remaining friends mysteriously not reaching me. Invitations to family events arriving too late. "Oh, Martha, I told you about the dinner last week," Vanessa would insist, her tone suggesting I was losing my grip. "Don't you remember?" I did not remember, because she had never told me. My bedroom, once my sanctuary, became increasingly foreign. Items would move overnight: my reading glasses, my medication, family photographs. When I confronted Vanessa, her response was always the same. A concerned look exchanged with James, followed by, "We haven't touched anything, Martha. Perhaps you forgot where you put them." I hadn't forgotten. I never forgot. One morning, I found my pressure pills in a different container. I organized them by day of the week, Vanessa explained sweetly when I asked. "It'll be easier for you to remember now." But I noticed the pills looked slightly different, rounder, with a faint yellow tint instead of white. That night, I pretended to take them, but secretly slipped them into my pocket. The next day, I showed them to my pharmacist. "These aren't your prescribed medication, Mrs. Wilson." He frowned. "They're a mild sedative. Where did you get these?" My blood ran cold. Was she drugging me? To what end? When James came home that evening, I tried to talk to him, But as always, he was distracted, glancing at his phone repeatedly. "Mom, I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Vanessa is a healthcare professional. She knows what she's doing." "That's what worries me," I replied quietly. Later that week, Eleanor invited me for tea. She'd noticed how rarely I left the house anymore, how I'd stopped attending the neighborhood book club. "You seem different, Martha," she said, serving Earl Grey in delicate cups. "Is everything all right at home?" The kindness in her eyes broke something in me. For the first time, I confided in someone about the accidents happening in the house, how my favorite photographs had been accidentally damaged during cleaning, how I'd been forgotten at a shopping mall for hours. Eleanor listened intently, her expression growing more troubled. "Martha," she said finally, "I was a social worker for 30 years before retiring. What you're describing sounds like elder abuse." "Abuse?" I recoiled at the word. No, James wouldn't. He's not a bad person. He's just blind when it comes to Vanessa. Intentional or not, what's happening isn't right," Eleanor insisted. "You should document everything. Dates, times, details." "I can't do that to my son," I protested. But that evening, as Vanessa hosted James's work colleagues for dinner, I understood the necessity of Eleanor's advice. Throughout the meal, Vanessa wove subtle insinuations about my confusion and declining mental state, sharing exaggerated or completely fabricated stories. Last week, she tried to cook breakfast at 3 a.m. and nearly burned the house down, she told them, her voice dripping with false concern. It never happened. When I attempted to defend myself, Vanessa looked at me with practiced compassion. "Oh, Martha, honey, that never happened. You're confusing your memories again." The pity in the guest's eyes crushed what remained of my spirit. My word now carried less weight than Vanessa's, even in my own home. That night, I started keeping a journal. The leather-bound journal became my silent confidant. Every misplaced item, every forgotten message, every subtle slight, I documented it all in meticulous detail. Eleanor had given me the journal, along with a small digital recorder. "Just in case," she'd said, squeezing my hand. I felt paranoid using it, but something deep inside warned me I needed evidence, something beyond my own increasingly doubted word. 3 weeks into my secret documentation, I discovered something that made my blood freeze. I was searching for my missing photo album, the one containing irreplaceable pictures of Robert and James when he was small. When I decided to look in James's home office, I rarely entered this room. It was Vanessa's domain now, though technically James's workspace. The door was unlocked that afternoon. Perhaps she'd grown careless, confident in my supposed confusion. The album wasn't there, but tucked in a drawer, I found something equally valuable. A property assessment report for the house, along with handwritten notes about renovation potential and quick sale recommendations. In the same file, glossy brochures advertised Golden Sunset Assisted Living Facility with circled monthly rates and payment options. The truth hit me like a physical blow. They were planning to put me away, sell my house, the house I bought for them, and dispose of me like an inconvenient piece of furniture. But how could they sell property that was in my name? I continued searching, my hands trembling with both fear and anger. In a locked cabinet, the key hidden predictably beneath a potted plant, I found something truly horrifying: partially completed forms for mental capacity evaluation. The document listed various episodes of confusion and erratic behavior, all fabricated. Incidents that never happened, witnesses who likely didn't exist. They were building a case to declare me mentally incompetent. I photographed everything with the small camera Eleanor had lent me, careful to leave no trace of my discovery. That night, I made a decision that went against every maternal instinct I'd ever had. I hid the recorder under the living room coffee table, wedging it into a spot where the decorative molding created a perfect hiding place. I went to bed with a racing heart, questioning if I was overreacting. Maybe there was an innocent explanation. Maybe James was just concerned about my well-being. Maybe. The next morning, I retrieved the recorder while Vanessa was showering and James had left for work. With trembling fingers, I pressed play, expecting to hear nothing but household silence. What I heard instead confirmed my worst fears. The doctor said we need more examples of erratic behavior before requesting formal evaluation. James's voice, sounding troubled. "Then we'll create those examples," Vanessa replied coldly. If we start adjusting her medication like we did with your father, we'll see faster results. The mention of Robert paralyzed me. What had they done to my husband? I don't feel good about this, James hesitated. Sweetheart, Vanessa's voice turned seductive but threatening. Do you want that vacation home or not? Once we sell this property and she's properly accommodated, we'll have all the money we need. I felt physically ill, clutching the kitchen counter as the room spun around me. My son's betrayal was almost unbearable, but the implications were clear. This wasn't just about my dignity anymore. It was potentially about my life. That evening, I watched through a crack in my door as Vanessa switched pills in my medication container, confirming every suspicion. Instead of confronting her, I began secretly discarding the tampered medication and sought independent medical help through Eleanor. My journal entry that night contained just 3 words. They're killing me. You need to leave that house, Martha, Eleanor insisted over tea at her kitchen table, her normally gentle voice firm with concern. They're not just emotionally abusing you, they're tampering with your medication. That's criminal. Where would I go? I asked, staring into my untouched cup. At my age, starting over seems impossible. You can stay with me until we figure something out, she offered immediately. I shook my head. I can't put you at risk. If they're capable of this. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I wasn't just a social worker, Martha. Before that, I practiced elder law for 15 years. Trust me, I know how to handle people like your daughter-in-law. That afternoon, Eleanor helped me construct a plan. First, we'd need to confirm my legal standing regarding the house. While she made calls to former colleagues, I continued gathering evidence. I started bringing my own food from a secret stash Eleanor provided, avoiding anything Vanessa prepared. I kept my medication hidden in a hollowed-out book Eleanor had given me, replacing the pills in my regular container with vitamin C tablets that looked similar. For 2 weeks, I played the role they expected, becoming slightly more forgetful, occasionally confused. It was degrading, but necessary. All the while, the recorder captured damning conversations. She's getting worse, Vanessa told James one evening, satisfaction evident in her voice. Dr. Miller says we might have grounds for a competency hearing soon. Dr. Miller, a name I didn't recognize, certainly not my regular physician. Another piece of the puzzle. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. I'd prepared a special dinner to celebrate James's promotion, pushing through exhaustion and growing paranoia about my safety. I'd spent hours cooking his favorite meal, pot roast with rosemary potatoes, just like I used to make when he was in college. Vanessa arrived home in a foul mood after a tense phone call. She immediately criticized the table I'd set. These plates? Seriously? It's a promotion, not a nursing home lunch. James, visibly uncomfortable with the mounting tension, tried to mediate. Everything looks great, Mom. During dinner, I attempted to join their conversation about James's new colleagues, but Vanessa continuously interrupted or corrected me. That's not what he said, Martha. You need to pay better attention. When I finally managed to share a story about the beginning of James's career, Vanessa accidentally knocked over her wine glass, spilling red wine across the white tablecloth. See what you made me do? Your rambling distracted me. Something inside me snapped. After weeks of documenting abuse, I finally stood up for myself. Stop blaming me for everything. This is my house too. The statement silenced the table. Vanessa, her eyes cold as ice, responded slowly, deliberately. Your house? You're just an ungrateful guest here. I looked at my son, pleading silently. James, are you going to let her speak to me this way? His silence was deafening. Emboldened by James's cowardice, Vanessa stood, leaned across the table, and spat the words that would change everything. I hope you die soon. It would be a relief for all of us. I stared at my son, silently begging him to defend me, to say anything. He simply lowered his head, his silent complicity more painful than any words could have been. That night, I didn't sleep. I listened to their muffled argument through the wall, Vanessa's voice dominant and unapologetic, James's weak protests eventually surrendering. By morning, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I called Eleanor at dawn. It's time, I told her. I need to disappear. I left on a Tuesday morning. Vanessa had an early shift at the hospital, and James had already departed for work after barely acknowledging me at breakfast. The timing couldn't have been better. My escape plan was simple but effective. I packed only essentials into a small suitcase, Important documents, medications, a few clothes, and the irreplaceable mementos I'd managed to hide from Vanessa's organizing. On my bed, I left a handwritten note. You wished for my death. To you, I am now dead. Eleanor was waiting in her car around the corner. My heart pounded as I closed the front door behind me, half expecting Vanessa to materialize and stop me. But the street remained quiet as I walked away from the house I'd purchased with my life savings, a gift that had become my prison. You're doing the right thing, Eleanor assured me as we drove to her home. This isn't abandonment, it's self-preservation. Eleanor's tidy colonial house became my sanctuary. She converted her guest room into my temporary bedroom, complete with a small desk where we could work on what she called Operation Justice. First thing, Eleanor said, spreading papers across her dining room table. Let's examine your legal standing. She'd contacted her former law partner, Richard, who specialized in elder law. He arrived that afternoon with a younger attorney named Michael, who had experience with financial abuse cases. Mrs. Wilson, Richard began, his voice gentle but professional. Based on the documents you provided, the situation is clear. The property is legally and completely in your name. But I gave them the house, I protested weakly. Did you formally transfer the deed? Michael asked. Well, no. I just gave them the keys and told them it was a gift. The attorneys exchanged knowing glances. Mrs. Wilson, Richard explained, verbal gifts don't transfer legal ownership. Without a deed transfer, the house remains yours to control. They never asked to transfer the title, Eleanor realized aloud. They just assumed, or were planning to get it through other means, Michael added grimly, pointing to the competency evaluation forms I'd photographed. My mind raced with implications. The house was still mine. I had power I didn't realize. What can I do? I asked. You have options, Richard replied, from simply asking them to leave to selling the property outright. I need time to think, I said, overwhelmed by possibilities. Later that evening, Eleanor and I were reviewing my journal entries when my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. This pathetic drama is getting old. Come back and clean up the mess you left behind. Something hardened inside me. For months they'd manipulated, gaslighted, and plotted against me. They'd wished me dead, and now they expected me to return, like an obedient dog. I've made my decision, I told Eleanor, showing her the message. They need to understand the value of what they had only when they lose it. The next morning, Richard helped me draft a formal eviction notice. The property would be listed for sale immediately, with the stipulation that the current occupants had 30 days to vacate. Are you sure about this? Richard asked. Once we file these papers, there's no going back. I thought of James's silence at the dinner table, of Vanessa's cold wish for my death, of the tampered medication. I'm sure, I said firmly, but there's something else I need to know first. What's that? Eleanor asked. Vanessa mentioned doing to Robert what they were trying to do to me. I need to understand what happened to my husband. Michael nodded gravely. I have a contact at Memorial Hospital where your husband was treated. Let me see what I can find out. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in months. I stood in Eleanor's garden, face turned toward the sun, and breathed freely. For the first time since Robert's death, I wasn't just surviving, I was fighting back. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Vanessa. James is worried. Stop being childish and come home. I deleted the message without responding. Let them worry. Let them wonder. Their false concern couldn't touch me anymore. I was no longer their victim. I was becoming their reckoning. 3 days into my disappearance, Michael arrived at Eleanor's house with a thick folder tucked under his arm. His expression was grave as Eleanor ushered him into the living room where I waited. Mrs. Wilson, I found something concerning about your husband's medical records, he began, sitting across from me. The hospital was reluctant to share information, but my contact owed me a favor. He opened the folder and spread several documents on the coffee table between us. During Mr. Wilson's final weeks, there were multiple incident reports filed by a nurse named Sarah Jenkins. She documented unexplained discrepancies in your husband's medication logs. My throat tightened. What kind of discrepancies? Dosages that didn't match physician orders, pain medication administered ahead of schedule, notations that appeared altered. Michael pointed to highlighted sections on the reports. Nurse Jenkins suspected tampering, but before an investigation could begin, she was transferred to another unit after a complaint was filed against her. Let me guess, Eleanor interjected. Vanessa filed the complaint. Michael nodded grimly. Accused her of incompetence and unprofessional conduct. I closed my eyes. Memories of Robert's final weeks flooding back. He had deteriorated so quickly at the end. The doctors had called it a natural progression of his illness. But what if? Are you saying Vanessa may have accelerated my husband's death? The words felt impossible. Monstrous. I can't prove it definitively, Michael replied cautiously. But these records show a pattern that raises serious questions, especially combined with what you've documented about your own medication. We should go to the police, I said, anger rising like a tide. Without concrete proof, it would be your word against hers, Richard warned, having joined us midway through the conversation. And James would testify against me, I finished, the bitter truth settling in my stomach like lead. My own son would side with the woman who may have hastened his father's death. There's a more effective approach, Richard suggested. Use the legal power you still hold over the house to force them out while we gather more evidence. Eleanor took my hand. Martha, I know you want justice for Robert, but we need to be strategic. I nodded slowly, the shock giving way to resolve. If they had done to Robert what they attempted with me, justice would come, but in my time, on my terms. That evening, we finalized our plan. The house would be listed with a trusted realtor the following day. The eviction notice was prepared, to be delivered in precisely calculated timing. One more thing, Eleanor suggested. We should place a small obituary in the local paper. An obituary? I asked, confused. For you, Martha Wilson. Eleanor smiled slyly. Nothing fraudulent, just vague enough to create the impression you've passed away while legally remaining above board. The idea was both shocking and oddly satisfying. 2 days later, a small notice appeared in the Boston Herald. Martha Wilson, 73, passed peacefully after a brief illness. Private services held at family's request. That same day, I signed papers to list my house for sale. The realtor, a friend of Eleanor's who understood the sensitive nature of the situation, promised to handle everything discreetly. We watched the security footage Eleanor's son had installed remotely when James returned home that evening. He brought the newspaper inside, casually flipping through pages as he walked to the kitchen. When he reached the obituaries section, he stopped abruptly, his face draining of color. "Vanessa!" he shouted, his voice tinged with panic. She came running, annoyed at first, then shocked as she read the notice. They made frantic phone calls, to hospitals, to the newspaper, even to distant relatives I rarely spoke with. No one had answers. Their confusion gave me a grim satisfaction. Let them wonder. Let them worry. Let them feel a fraction of the fear they'd instilled in me. Tomorrow, I told Eleanor as we turned off the monitor, they get the eviction notice. For the first time in months, I slept without nightmares. The eviction notice arrived in an elegant navy blue envelope, hand-delivered by a courier service. Eleanor and I watched through the security camera feed as Vanessa, expecting some social invitation, tore it open with a smile that quickly dissolved into shocked disbelief. "James!" Her shriek echoed through the house. "James!" He appeared moments later, running from his home office, alarm evident in his hurried movements. "What? What's wrong?" Wordlessly, she thrust the document at him. We watched as he read it multiple times, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror. "This is absurd," he stammered. "There must be some mistake." Vanessa was already on her phone, pacing frantically. "Gerald, it's Vanessa Wilson. We just received some ridiculous eviction notice claiming our house has been sold. I need you to fix this immediately." The conversation that followed was a marvel of professional restraint from Gerald, Vanessa's attorney. Even through the tinny audio, we could hear his measured explanation of the legal realities. "Mrs. Wilson, I've checked the property records. The house is registered solely in Martha Wilson's name. If she sold it—" "But she gave us the house," Vanessa interrupted, her voice rising hysterically. "We've been living here for months." "Unfortunately," Gerald replied patiently, "a verbal gift has no legal standing. If the deed remained in her name, legally, the property is hers to sell." The call ended with Vanessa hurling her phone across the room, narrowly missing a crystal vase. "This is your mother's doing," she hissed at James. "She's not dead. This is revenge." James sank onto the sofa, head in his hands. "How could she do this to us, after everything we've done for her?" The irony of his statement made me laugh bitterly. Eleanor squeezed my shoulder in silent support. "Should we send the second package now?" she asked. I nodded. "It's time." The second courier arrived an hour later, delivering a sealed envelope with the letterhead of Eleanor's former law firm. Inside was a handwritten note in my elegant script. "You wished for my death. In return, you will lose only a house. Consider yourselves fortunate for the balance of the exchange." The chaos that erupted after this delivery surpassed even our expectations. Vanessa destroyed a floor lamp, a set of dishes, and James's framed law school diploma in her rage. James attempted to call my cell phone repeatedly, leaving increasingly desperate voicemails. "Mom, please, we can talk about this. Whatever you think happened. I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding." I deleted each message without responding. That evening, for the first time in weeks, I ventured outside Eleanor's house. With a new hairstyle, gray instead of my usual dyed brown, and simple clothes Eleanor had purchased for me, I felt invisible in the best possible way. We drove to a small seafood restaurant in Rockport, a coastal town 30 miles from Boston. "I've always loved the ocean," I told Eleanor as we watched the sunset over the harbor. "Robert and I dreamed of retiring to a place like this." "It's never too late to start again," she replied, studying a real estate brochure she'd picked up. The idea took root immediately. With the proceeds from selling the Boston house, I could afford a modest place here, far enough from James and Vanessa, yet close enough to remain connected to my few friends. Later that night, the realtor called with unexpected news. "Mrs. Wilson, you've received an offer already. Full asking price, cash, with a request for expedited closing." "Who's the buyer?" I asked. "Suspicious. It might be a ploy from James. A couple relocating from Chicago. Connor is their name. They're willing to honor the 30-day vacancy period for current occupants." I accepted immediately. The pieces were falling into place faster than I'd anticipated. Within weeks, I would have the financial means to start over. The house that had become my prison would be sold to strangers, and James and Vanessa would face the consequences of their actions. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today I reclaimed my power. Tomorrow I build a new life." The weeks following the eviction notice brought unexpected developments. Through our security feed, Eleanor and I witnessed the rapid disintegration of James and Vanessa's relationship. "How could she do this to us?" Vanessa screamed one evening, hurling a vase across the living room. "She betrayed us." James, emerging from what seemed like a fog of denial, replied with surprising clarity, "No, Vanessa, we betrayed her first." Their financial reality was unraveling quickly. With just 3 weeks to find a new place, they discovered their combined credit wasn't sufficient for a comparable home in Boston. Friends they'd reached out to for temporary housing mysteriously became unavailable after hearing why they needed to move. "Someone's been talking," Vanessa accused, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. She didn't know that Eleanor had quietly reached out to their social circle, sharing just enough of the story to ensure no doors would open easily. Meanwhile, my own life was transforming. The house sale was proceeding rapidly, and I'd found a charming cottage in Rockport with a view of the harbor. The real estate agent, sensing my urgency, had expedited viewings and paperwork. "It needs some updating," she warned as we toured the property. "That's perfect," I replied. "I need a project." The thought of renovating, choosing paint colors, arranging furniture, planting a small garden, filled me with an energy I hadn't felt in years. This wouldn't just be a house, it would be my renaissance. One afternoon, Michael arrived at Eleanor's with new information that chilled me to the bone. "I found Sarah Jenkins, the nurse who reported discrepancies in your husband's care," he said, laying a recording device on the table. "She agreed to share what she remembers on the condition we keep her identity protected." The recording revealed details more disturbing than I'd imagined. Sarah described finding Vanessa alone with Robert's IV multiple times, though she wasn't assigned to his care. She noticed that his pain seemed to increase after Vanessa's visits, despite medication that should have controlled it. "The final week was strange," Sarah's voice explained. "Mr. Wilson had been lucid, even improving slightly, then suddenly deteriorated overnight. When I checked his medication log, entries had been altered. When I reported it, I was transferred 3 days later." I turned off the recording, unable to listen further. The room spun around me. "Are you saying she hastened his death?" The words felt impossible to speak. "I can't prove it conclusively," Michael replied gently. "But there's enough here to warrant further investigation." "I want to go to the police," I insisted. "Without clear evidence of tampering, It would be difficult to prove, Richard cautioned, especially after this much time has passed. But we can't let her get away with this. My voice broke with the weight of this new betrayal. There are other ways to ensure justice, Eleanor said quietly. Ways that don't rely on a criminal justice system that often fails the elderly. She outlined an alternative approach. Document everything. Share information strategically with those who needed to know, like the hospital administration and state nursing board, and focus on rebuilding my life while Vanessa's carefully constructed one fell apart. The eviction is just the beginning, Eleanor assured me. Once she loses the foundation of security you provided, everything else will follow. The next day, we received word that James had been spending hours at the public library, researching legal challenges to evictions. His efforts would be futile. Richard had ensured every document was ironclad, but I felt a twinge of sadness imagining my son scrambling for solutions. That evening, I signed the purchase agreement for the Rockport cottage. The closing would align perfectly with the Boston house sale, allowing me to move directly from Eleanor's to my new home. As I signed my name with a steady hand, I felt Robert's presence beside me, approving. If he had indeed been a victim of Vanessa's machinations, this was part of his justice too. I wish you could see this new beginning, I whispered to his memory, but I'll enjoy it enough for both of us. 2 weeks before the eviction deadline, Eleanor and I made a bold decision. With Richard's legal guidance, we arranged for my personal belongings to be removed from the Boston house while James and Vanessa were at work. Are you sure about this? Eleanor asked, as we watched the movers load boxes into their truck. It feels like poking a hornet's nest. They've had weeks to contact me properly, I replied. All I've received are James's manipulative voicemails and Vanessa's threatening texts. They don't deserve more consideration than this. The movers had strict instructions. Take only items from my bedroom and the boxes in the attic, clearly marked with my name. Everything else would remain untouched. I wasn't interested in the furniture or appliances I'd paid for. Those could go with the house. I wanted only my personal history, the artifacts of my life before this nightmare began. That evening, our security feed captured James and Vanessa's reaction upon discovering my empty room. Vanessa seemed merely irritated at the intrusion, but James sat on my stripped bed for nearly an hour, holding an old photograph that had fallen behind the nightstand, one the movers had missed. For the first time since my departure, I saw genuine regret in my son's expression. It came too late to change my course, but it softened something in my heart I hadn't realized had hardened. The next morning brought unexpected news. Michael called, his voice urgent. Mrs. Wilson, I've been in contact with the state nursing board. Without mentioning names, I described the medication discrepancies in your husband's case and your own experience. They're very interested in speaking with you. Will it lead to an investigation of Vanessa? I asked. Potentially, yes, especially if we can locate other patients with similar experiences. The possibility of holding Vanessa accountable for Robert's treatment kindled a fire in me. That afternoon, I gave a detailed statement to a nursing board investigator, providing dates, medication names, and all the evidence I'd gathered. The investigator seemed particularly disturbed by the recorded conversation about adjusting my medication like we did with your father. This suggests a pattern of behavior, she noted grimly. We take these allegations very seriously, Mrs. Wilson. Meanwhile, the closing date for both properties approached. My Rockport cottage would be mine in just 10 days, and the Boston house would officially belong to the Connors a week after that. Eleanor helped me shop for essentials for my new home, practical things like kitchen supplies and linens, but also small luxuries I'd denied myself for years. A plush reading chair, artwork for the walls, garden tools for the small plot overlooking the harbor. You deserve this, she insisted, when I hesitated over what felt like extravagances. After everything you've been through, you deserve joy. The concept felt foreign after months of being made to feel burdensome. Unwanted joy. Could I really claim that again at 73? That evening, a final package was delivered to the Boston house. Inside was a legal document informing James and Vanessa that any remaining belongings must be removed by the eviction date, along with a cashier's check for $5,000. A parting gift, I'd told Richard. Not because they deserve it, but because I need to close this chapter completely. The gesture wasn't about generosity, it was about freedom. With this final act, I was purchasing my emotional release from obligation. They could no longer claim I'd left them destitute or without options. The security feed showed James staring at the check for a long time before Vanessa snatched it from his hands. "At least your mother has some decency left," she snapped. "This will barely cover our moving expenses." James didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out a small box from the hall closet and began sorting through old photographs, images from his childhood, his graduation, his wedding. His fingers lingered on a picture of us together on his 10th birthday, both of us grinning beside a homemade cake. For a moment, I wondered what might have been if he'd found his voice earlier, stood against Vanessa's manipulations. But the past couldn't be rewritten. We could only move forward from where we stood, and I was standing on the threshold of a new life. Moving day arrived with unexpected emotions. As I packed my temporary belongings at Eleanor's house, a peculiar melancholy settled over me. Not regret, I had none about my decisions, but a mourning for what should have been. A son who protected rather than betrayed. A family bond that withstood challenges rather than dissolving at the first test. "You're allowed to feel sad, Martha," Eleanor said, noticing my silence as I folded clothes. "Righteous actions don't eliminate grief." The drive to Rockport was quiet, the radio playing soft classical music as we followed the moving truck. My new cottage appeared on the horizon, its weathered shingles and blue door welcoming me home. The small garden needed attention, and the interior would require fresh paint, but it was mine, a sanctuary earned through pain and resilience. The movers efficiently placed furniture, assembled my bed, and arranged boxes according to my instructions. By late afternoon, the cottage had transformed from an empty space to the beginning of a home. Eleanor stayed to help unpack essentials, hanging curtains and organizing the kitchen while I arranged my bedroom. "Will you be all right alone tonight?" she asked as evening approached. "I think I need to be," I replied. "This first night should be just me." After she left, I sat on my new porch overlooking the harbor, watching fishing boats return as the sun set. The sea air filled my lungs, salty and clean, washing away the stifling atmosphere that had surrounded me for too long. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months, without fear of tampered medication or whispering voices beyond my door. Morning brought a call from Richard. "I have news," he said without preamble. "The nursing board has opened a formal investigation into Vanessa's professional conduct. They've already spoken with 3 former colleagues who corroborated concerns about her medication handling practices." "Will they contact her current employers?" I asked. "They already have. She's been placed on administrative leave pending the investigation." I should have felt vindicated, but instead, a strange hollowness filled me. Consequences were beginning, yet they felt distant from my new reality. Later that day, Michael arrived with more developments. "James and Vanessa had a significant argument last night," he reported, based on our still active security feed. "It appears he found something in the attic while packing, your items that they claimed were lost or damaged." He showed me footage of James confronting Vanessa with a box containing my supposedly destroyed photo albums, jewelry, and personal mementos she'd hidden away. "You told me these were ruined in the water damage," James accused, his voice cracking. Vanessa's dismissive shrug spoke volumes. She didn't need them anymore. They were just collecting dust. "They weren't yours to decide about," James shouted, perhaps the first time I'd heard him stand up to her. The argument escalated until Vanessa delivered a devastating truth. "This marriage was a transaction, James. You offered stability and asset potential. I provided companionship. The arrangement is no longer advantageous." She announced she'd accepted a position in Chicago, leaving the following weekend, with or without him. "Take what you want from this mess," she said, gesturing around the house. "I'm done playing house with a spineless mama's boy and his vindictive mother." The footage ended with James alone in the living room, surrounded by half-packed boxes, his face showing the dawning realization of his complicity in destroying what mattered most. That evening, I walked along the Rockport shoreline, processing these developments. Unlike the fierce satisfaction I'd anticipated, I felt strangely detached. Vanessa's unraveling career and their fractured marriage seemed like distant news about strangers. What consumed me instead was the cottage waiting for my return, the garden beds I would plant come spring, the walls I would paint in soft coastal colors, the neighbors I'd begun to greet on my morning walks. I'd expected revenge to taste sweet. Instead, it tasted like salt air and possibility. When I returned home, I found a simple envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a faded photograph of James as a teenager, standing proudly beside the science fair project I'd helped him build. On the back, in his handwriting, "I'm sorry for everything. No return address, no plea for forgiveness or reconciliation, just an acknowledgement." I placed the photo on my mantle, neither hiding it nor giving it prominence. Like James himself, it would exist in my life, acknowledged but no longer defining my days. The first frost of autumn touched Rockport, glazing my garden in delicate white. 3 months had passed since I moved into the cottage, and already it felt more like home than the Boston house ever had. I'd painted the walls in shades of blue and cream, planted hardy shrubs that would bloom in spring, and established a routine that centered me. Morning coffee on the porch, afternoon walks along the harbor, evenings with books or conversations with my new neighbor, Claire, a retired literature professor who shared my love of mystery novels. Eleanor visited every other weekend, bringing news from Boston that increasingly felt like updates about characters in a book I'd once read but was no longer invested in. Vanessa moved to Chicago last month, she reported during one visit. The nursing board investigation is still ongoing, but she found work at a private clinic where they either didn't check references or didn't care. "And James?" I asked, the question still causing a slight tightening in my chest. "Still in that small apartment in Cambridge. He's been quieter on social media. Someone mentioned he's seeing a therapist." I nodded, feeling neither satisfaction nor sorrow. It was simply information about a life that had diverged from mine. That afternoon, while organizing my study, I discovered Robert's old address book. Flipping through it, I found entries for friends we'd lost touch with over the years, colleagues from his university days, neighbors from our first apartment, extended family members who'd drifted away. An idea formed. I began making calls, reintroducing myself to voices from the past. Many were surprised to hear from me, especially when I explained my new circumstances. "You live in Rockport now?" Robert's former department chair, Thomas, exclaimed. "My sister has a summer home there. Next time I visit her, we should have dinner." One by one, connections reawakened. By the end of the week, I'd arranged 3 visits and joined a book club through one of Robert's former colleagues who now lived in neighboring Gloucester. Life was expanding again, radiating outward from my cottage by the sea. Then came the envelope, thick cream stationery, my name in familiar handwriting, James. I let it sit unopened on my kitchen table for 3 days, circling it like some volatile object that might explode if handled incorrectly. Finally, on a stormy afternoon when the sea crashed against the rocks below my garden, I made a pot of tea and opened it. Inside was a multi-page letter and a small key. "Mom," it began simply. He wrote of his gradual awakening to what had happened, how Vanessa's manipulation had been so subtle he'd barely noticed his own transformation from protective son to complicit enabler. He described the shame that now kept him awake at night, the therapy sessions where he was learning to recognize the patterns of emotional abuse he'd not only allowed but participated in. "I don't expect forgiveness," he wrote toward the end. "I don't deserve it, but I need you to know that I understand now what I did and what I failed to do." The key enclosed is to a storage unit where I've placed Dad's things that I managed to save from the house. His watch, his books, his collection of vinyl records. They belong with you. No request to meet, no plea for reconciliation, just an acknowledgement and a return of what should have been mine all along. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my desk drawer. The key I hung on a hook by the door, not yet decided whether I would use it. That evening, as rain lashed against my windows, I called Eleanor. "James sent me a letter," I told her, "and a key to a storage unit with Robert's belongings. How do you feel about that?" she asked carefully. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "Part of me wants to keep that door closed forever. Another part wants to see if genuine remorse can lead to something new," she finished. "Not reconciliation," I clarified quickly. "I don't think I can ever trust him that way again. But maybe acknowledgement of each other's existence, at least." After we hung up, I stood at my window watching the storm gradually subside, the clouds parting to reveal a sliver of moon. The sea below remained turbulent, but the sky was clearing, a metaphor too obvious to ignore. I took the key from its hook and placed it in my purse. Tomorrow, I decided, I would drive to Boston and see what remained of Robert's legacy. Not for James, but for myself. For the memories of a life before betrayal had rewritten everything. Some doors needed to be opened, if only to finally close them properly. The storage unit was in Cambridge, a small climate-controlled space in a modern facility. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before finding the courage to enter, the key cold in my palm. Unit 217 contained 6 neatly labeled boxes, a vintage record player, and Robert's leather reading chair, the one I'd assumed had been sold or discarded. A handwritten note sat on the chair. I saved what I could. I opened the first box. Robert's record collection, alphabetized just as he'd always kept it. Coltrane, Davis, Fitzgerald, Holiday, the soundtrack of our early marriage. The second box held his books, first editions he'd collected, academic texts he'd authored, dog-eared paperbacks he'd read repeatedly. The third box made me pause. Photo albums I thought were lost forever. Our wedding, James's childhood, family vacations, the visual archive of our lives together. In the fourth box, I found Robert's watches, cufflinks, and the fountain pen set I'd given him for our 30th anniversary. The fifth contained his tweed jackets, still carrying the faint scent of his cologne. The last box held letters, every card and note I'd written him during our marriage, preserved in chronological order. I sat in Robert's chair, surrounded by these artifacts of our shared life, and finally allowed myself to weep, not from sadness or anger, but from the realization that these treasured items had been rescued. James had salvaged these pieces of his father, preserved them while he was still under Vanessa's influence. It suggested a core of the son I'd raised had remained intact even during his worst betrayal. After 3 hours organizing and examining each item, I made arrangements for everything to be delivered to Rockport the following week. Everything except Robert's chair, which I took with me immediately, securing it in my car with bungee cords. A week later, I received an email from James, the first direct contact since his letter. Did you find what you were looking for in the storage unit? Simple, direct, asking nothing. I replied with equal brevity. Yes, thank you for preserving these things. His response came the next day. There's a coffee shop in Gloucester called Harbor View. I go there sometimes on Saturday afternoons. Not quite an invitation, but an opening, a possibility. 3 weeks passed before I decided what to do with this information. 3 weeks of placing Robert's belongings around my cottage, of re-listening to his records, of sitting in his chair watching the sea. 3 weeks of quiet conversations with Eleanor about forgiveness, boundaries, and the possibility of selective reconciliation. On a crisp December Saturday, I drove to Gloucester. Harborview. Cafe was small but elegant, with windows facing the water. I spotted James immediately, sitting alone at a corner table, staring into his cup. He looked thinner, older, his shoulders slightly stooped. He hadn't noticed me yet. I watched him for a moment. This man who was my son, but also a stranger. The boy I'd raised. The man who had betrayed me. The person now sitting alone, waiting for something. Perhaps for me, perhaps just passing time. I approached his table. He looked up, eyes widening with surprise. I didn't think you'd come, he said, half rising. Neither did I replied honestly, taking the seat across from him. Silence stretched between us, filled with unspoken words. You look well, he finally said. Rockport agrees with you. Yes, I nodded. I've found peace there. More silence. Mom, he began, his voice catching. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I raised my hand, stopping him. You're right. You don't. He flinched but nodded. But deserving has nothing to do with forgiveness, I continued. Forgiveness is something I give myself, not you. It's about releasing the hold that anger has on me. Have you? He asked softly. Forgiven me? I'm working on it, I answered truthfully. Every day. I took a sip of water, gathering my thoughts. Do you know what hurt the most, James? Not Vanessa's words, your silence. When she wished me dead, you said nothing. His eyes filled with tears. I know. I have no excuse. No, you don't, I agreed. And I may never completely trust you again. But you're still my son. I reached into my purse and removed a small wrapped package. This was your father's pocket watch. He would want you to have it. James stared at the package but didn't take it. I don't deserve this either. No, I said, placing it on the table between us. But it's yours nonetheless. We talked for an hour, not about reconciliation or the future, but about simpler things. My garden, his new position at a smaller law firm, books we'd read recently, the boundaries of our new relationship forming with each careful sentence. When I rose to leave, he asked, Can I call you sometime? Yes, I said. Not often, not yet, but sometimes. Walking back to my car, I felt neither triumph nor closure, just the quiet acknowledgement that life continues to evolve, that relationships transform, that healing comes not from grand gestures, but from small moments of truth. That evening, I sat in Robert's chair on my porch, watching the winter sun set over the harbor. The chair fit perfectly in the space I'd created, just as I now fit perfectly in my new life. Not because everything had been resolved or forgotten, but because I had finally learned what truly belonged to me, my dignity, my choices, my power to define my own worth. The betrayal that nearly destroyed me had instead become the foundation for something unexpected, a life built entirely on my own terms. And that, I realized, was the most profound victory of all. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.